The RFP is about the core exam of the rural study for a Wave 2 exam. What I'm going to make and share with you is a few slides on what is our approach to ancillary studies that would be part of the rural core exam that will be glued together in the form of a single exam. And a few preliminary thoughts. The whole idea of the philosophy of the ancillary studies is to create a full bodied and comprehensive characterization of the rural exposome as well as the rural endosome, if you want to call individual level phenotyping at an individual level as within participant profiling. And the whole idea is to be holistic and have a combination of ancillary studies that really expands beyond the core exam, multiple aspects of the rural cohort study with a granularity that enables us to understand the multi-level, multi-dimensional determinants of heart, lung, blood, and sleep disorders in the rural context. The purpose of this renewal, as well as the purpose of the ancillary studies and the group of ancillary studies, is centered on promoting, maintaining, and nurturing rural health and well-being in the target counties that are part of the rural family. So beyond those 2 points, we want full-bodied characterization, and we also want to make sure that any intent is to help rural health and well-being. It's also important to make sure that this opportunity for ancillary studies is an equal opportunity to investigators within the rural family and also outside the rural family, so that the best investigators in the country can get together, work with us, work with many of you to put together ancillary studies. At the core of this is that we want the ancillary study and the core exam to be glued together seamlessly in an examination, which is part of Wave 2 examination of rural and is feasible, it is acceptable to our participants, it is safe for our participants, and it adds value to the core exam that we are thinking of as permitted by the NHLBI. And there are 4 different kinds of ancillary studies that we can think of. Some would be new phenotyping on the MEU. They may have a post-MEU phase, but they could be pure in the MEU. There'll be some studies that would be purely post-MEU and may work off the smartphone backbone of the core rural study. There could be studies that leverage the biosample collection of rural, and these are traditionally what we call as freezer studies. So there could be a combination of using biosamples and the core phenotyping that rural has. There could be a 4th category beyond the MEU, the post-MEU, and freezer studies. And the 4th category is where we have a callback, which is distance from the core rural exam. To give you an example, a year after the rural MEU leaves a county, we could have another van move in and do, for example, an eye exam. This is out of cycle, but it would be a separate exam. It would be an ancillary study. It is still glued to the core exam and it is part of it. And through all this, it's the responsibility that I and Suzanne have for making sure that this process is feasible. We can do the study, our MEU staff can do it, we can do it to manage the participant burden so that it's within acceptable limits. That's approximately somewhere between 2.5 and 4 hours, depending on how quick a participant goes through the mobile examination unit. And it has to be safe as well, and it should make sense that this exam should be done in the rural cohort study. This is just a glimpse of the NHLBI announcement, which is on the rural website, and several investigators have emailed me about this, where the National Heart Lung Blood Institute has announced that we can have ancillary studies that could target up to 4,000 participants with an examination that would begin approximately in January, February of 2027. This gives you a sense of the timeline. What all do we need to do in order to glue this ancillary study to the core exam and begin in January 2027, which is what you see on the right-hand side of the slide. But I think we want to start on the left-hand side. Around February of 2025, we'll invite a number of people who are interested in ancillary studies to study presentation, idea presentation, in what we call as a scientific retreat. These retreats are typically somewhere between 2 to 3 hours in duration. They'll be organized, making sure that the people who are presenting are there, and there will be also a few rural investigators on that call, and I'll explain to you who they are. There'll be a follow-up retreat, which is a second one, which would be approximately in the March timeframe, and this would be because there'll be questions that would be raised by the review process in February of 2025, and investigators would have a chance to respond to them and come back to us. At which point of time, we would give them the go-ahead to prepare the ancillary study, and anticipation that this would be submitted for the June 2025 cycle, which is what you see in yellow over there in the middle of this timeline. We hope that during this process, we'll have OSMB approval that we can move forward. And if you start and submit a grant in June 2025, you will see that we could start, potentially, if we get funded almost immediately, we could start a little bit ahead of the February 2027 cycle. And starting in June 2025 or in October 2025 gives you a chance to go through a revision of the submission so that you can have an A1 application going in March or in July and still get funded and have council review. And I'll show you a slide that details why this might be the case. And we are hoping that once the study is funded, if it's funded before the actual exam start date, there can be a planning phase, or there can be a request to delay the start of the ancillary study so that it can begin approximately with the start of the rural MEU exam. So what we want people to do, we basically want people to make a 10-minute presentation, 10 slides, very brief. We need a title of the presentation. We need the principal investigator. We need a couple of sentences about the background. This is why we want to do the study. We need 2 or 3 bullets that here are our aims, and here is our main study hypothesis. Then it would be, what phenotyping are we doing? And then another slide, why the rural study and why not some other study? And then there'll be a study that talks about participant burden, either in the MEU or outside the MEU, or utilization of biosamples. There will have to be a slide on, are there potential adverse effects anticipated from the ancillary study? And the 8th slide would be sample size and statistical power. I'm working with Edwin to make that available on our website to every investigator within the rural family and outside the rural family, that if you examine 4,000 participants, what's our power to look at associations for continuous outcomes, for binary outcomes, for survival analyses, for regression analyses. So everybody will have an anticipated sample size by county, the power that we will have across different strata, and so they can borrow from our website, whatever we will have on the sample size. The 9th would be, if there are clinically actionable results, what is the plan to return these? And there'll be 10 minutes of questions and answers. In order to make this process open and fair, Suzanne and I would be the key people who would moderate these presentations as people who are co-leaders of the rural cohort study. We will take the help of 1 or more people from the SDCC, largely to think through what these ancillary studies might pose a burden on, say, our SDCC. We will also have as a member of this panel somebody from the mHealth course so that we can brainstorm how we will integrate the mHealth backbone into a potential ancillary study or not.
The goal of this framework is to try to be nimble so that we can respond rapidly to people and give quick feedback, but also feedback that helps to understand the way that the study could have additional participant burden, staff burden. And our goal is not just to recruit these folks, but we need to retain them as well and help provide very targeted feedback so that we get high quality ancillary studies that won't compromise retention in any way.
This is not a scientific review which will replace the study section review. That is not the goal of this. This is to help people move the presentation forward. The review will happen at a study section, and any approval that is given by the study will always have the caveat, just because you have a fundable score does not necessarily mean your study will begin exactly as planned. That will depend upon what is the group of ancillary studies that is funded. There might have to be coordination between the various ancillary studies, and there might also be reason to take some of these studies as callbacks in order to distribute the burden on rural participants. So the whole purpose is not to replace a study review or to be critical of this, but how do we facilitate the ancillary studies so that they are competitive at a study section and see what critique they get back in return. It's important to remember that the usual criteria that were used before January 25th, 2025 have changed. So this is just a reminder that now there are 3 factors that go for a review of ancillary studies. This is something most of you know already, but just to recap that we'll have to look at importance of research, rigor and feasibility, and expertise and resources, as this is the way the NIH panel reviews ancillary studies. I want to focus on the red boxes at the left hand and the right hand side. This just tells you that if you submit a grant on February 5th, 2026, the earliest start date would be July 1st, 2027 if you go through an A1 mechanism. This means that you would already miss about 6 months of participants. So this would be the absolute end date for any potential ancillary study to be submitted for the rural wave 2 examination, because after that, the loss to the study of the number of participants would result in major statistical limitation to actually integrate with the core rural data. Through the understanding of these various R01s, every R01 as it is submitted will have what we call as an integration fees. In our case, just to contextualize it, what we have been thinking, we'd have an integration fees for any R01 approximately of about $25,000 a year for the 4-year duration of the grant. And that would help with work done by the SDCC and by the RRC that would go, or the mHealth if mHealth is being used, that is not budgeted within the scope of the R01. This is not meant to be a resource generating entity, but this is just meant to offload some of the burden that is faced by the SDCC, the RRC, and sometimes the mHealth core after the funding. We hope that there are between 7 and 10 ancillary studies that are submitted. We hope somewhere between 3 and 6 of them are successful. And then we'll manage the participant burden depending on which bin. I mentioned 4 kinds of ancillary studies, where they fall along the spectrum to see whether they should be, in the MEU, a shortened exam, post-MEU, a freezer study, or a callback.